Hello, subscribers and new viewers and listeners. This is your co-host Stu, and I'm here with the paranormalist, Patty Wilson. Patty, how are you today?
I'm doing just fine, honey. How are you?
I'm doing great. So, what are you going to talk to us about today?
Gargoyles.
Oh, boy, I remember the movie Gargoyles from the late 60s, early 70s.
I have a copy of that. Let me tell you, it is
Huh?
horribly expensive to find a copy of that on DVD.
Oh, I bet. Yeah.
But that is my first introduction to the concept of gargoyles. I was
Uh-huh.
10 years old.
Hmm.
So that would have been about 1973, about 10 years old. It was on TV late in the evening, like 9 o'clock, which was terribly late for me back then.
Hmm.
And my mom had to work that night. My dad told her he's going to watch this movie, and she was extremely worried that he would let my sister and I see it. So we had to go to bed like 8:30, make sure we were there. But the more they talked about this movie around me and how upset she was that he was going to watch this movie, because to her it was sort of like watching a satanic film. My mother was very religious. The more curious I got. So they put me to bed despite my pleadings, and they said, you're not going to get to watch the movie. You need to go to bed, and blah, blah, blah. And I said, I won't be afraid. I promise I won't have nightmares. I'm doing the whole kid thing, right? So
Right.
after everything got quiet and Dad got into the movie, about 10 minutes into the movie, I crept to the doorway to watch the movie. And I would have gotten away with it, except my 6.5-year-old sister crept to the doorway as well
Uh-huh.
and watched the movie. And she had nightmares for weeks. Well, it didn't take long for her to confess that we watched the movie from the doorway of the bedroom, at which point my father was floating around in some hot water, and so was I. But I loved the movie, and it took me $70 to buy a copy of that movie. It was 70
Wow.
bucks.
Yeah,
And
that
my
was like
kids thought I was nuts.
Yeah, that was like the price of VHS movies when they first were released. That was about what they were. But if I remember right, the when I saw it, I don't think it was in color, or if it was, the color had faded so badly.
Yeah, I think it
But
was in
I
color, but
thought
it
that
was
the, the
desert. It was all kind of black and white stuff anyway.
yeah the makeup and the special effects for that era, I thought were really pretty good.
They were very good. And that's my first introduction to gargoyles.
Hmm. Hmm.
So, but I've always been fascinated with the subject. And I have to tell you, there's been a couple of stories I've gotten in the last 5 years that kind of got me interested in it again. So first of all, I have a dear set of friends, Brian and Terry Seach, who do everything's cryptozoology out in Western PA and Butler counties, where they usually work.
Okay.
And on the Ohio-Pennsylvania border, there have been a spate of gargoyle sightings for about the last 8 to 10 years.
Oh, really? Yeah.
Yeah. So that got me actively working back in the subject. So I wanted to do a little bit of a feature on gargoyles, talk a little bit about what they were historically, and then tell some stories, because there's some really amazing gargoyle stories out there. So basically, there's two schools of thought on gargoyles. The first is that they are an architectural feature. I'll get this right. First designed in the Middle Ages, used as a water spout. The word gargoyle comes from gargoyle, which is throat, and gargaras, which means gurgle. I may have butchered that, but that's basically the idea. So throat gurgle. That reflects the idea of water coming out of the gargoyle's mouth, which if you look at them, they often are like where the rain spouting runs out.
Sure. Yeah.
But there's another school of thought, a little more recent. And I have to say, my first question would be, what would make people put these little medieval, or huge, depending on the place, medieval looking monsters on their buildings? So it was thought that most of them came from churches, on churches, cathedrals, things like that. Notre Dame and different places are infamous for their gargoyles. And that either it was because they were saying that you would find shelter in the church from the devils of the world. Inside, you would be safer with God than without, shall we say. excuse me, or that they were actually a real species of some sort. And there are some really interesting types. The most famous type is called the Strix, or the Stigra. And they are a human hybrid with a bird. You'll see those ones. They look like human bird hybrids. They have heads and hands, and then a lot of times feathers. The horned gargoyles are most famous because of Notre Dame. But they're fascinating creatures, and some of them are not used as water spouts of any sort. They're just there for whatever decorative purpose they served. And some people believe they're to ward off spirits. There's a legend that the gargoyles were born in the dead of night, and they physically would fight off spirits, evil spirits, and act like guardians of humans. So they would protect those people sleeping under whatever roof they perched upon. So they literally would be stoned during the day, come alive at night, and that's a very interesting theory. There are theories about stone statues of other sorts. And then they would protect their charges who lived beneath their roof. And that might be a reason why gargoyles were placed. Some believe they were demonic creatures that were possessed by the souls of demons. They have a long and varied history. And I just found them fascinating. They go back to over 13,000 years, at least.
And in various art forms where you see them, or
yes, and stories of them and what have you. So it's fascinating. All those different ways you can see them. They're depicted as dogs, as lion-headed, the ones with the horns, the bird ones. There's ones that are messengers, which look like eagles or hawks on their heads. There's just all sorts of types of them. But I wanted to talk a little bit about gargoyles today. So we have these legends, and we have these beautiful pieces of statuary, or grotesque statues, whichever you see.
Whichever way you lean, right?
Yeah, well, yeah, I mean, I think that the intricacy of some of those statues is just amazing. And they've weathered well throughout time. I had a young man come to me 2 years ago now, and he told this story. About 11 years ago, 12 years ago now, he had been homeless, sleeping in his car, trying to get back on his feet after a bad divorce. And he ended up spending a year and a half sleeping in his car. This happened during that time period. So one night he was sleeping in his car, and he woke up. He heard a thud or a thump, and he thought somebody was trying to break into the car. And he said, I was fully awake. I was always uncomfortable, and I caught motion or movement outside the car. And I turned on the car and turned on the headlights, and standing in front of the car at the hood was this large, dark, winged creature. He estimated between 6 and 7 feet tall, and it had a grotesque face and large wings with arms attached. And he said it scared the hell out of him, and he honked the horn, and the thing kind of like stepped back a step, and then he said it sort of took a run and turned and took a run and fled. It started flying. And he's like, holy shit, what do I do? So he turned, like I said, he had the car on, so he decided he would go park outside the restaurant he was working at, because there's a lot of good lighting there. And he thought he'd get away from this area, because where he had been parked, it was very dark. Still in a town, but very dark. Okay. So he went to this restaurant, and he parked there right beside the building where all the bright lights were. And he's not at all interested in going back to sleep at this point. He's watching something on his phone and kind of keeping an eye out and what have you. And he hears this scratching and thud on the roof of his car. And he can't see it at that point, but he can hear something heavy walking on the hood. He's like, you could hear the hood denting, depressing. So he's sitting there in the car waiting, thinking, okay, just stay calm, just stay calm, just stay calm. And then whatever it was jumped off on the left-hand driver's side. And he had a flashlight in the car, and by now he has the flashlight on. And he shines it out through the window. It's the same creature. And it's standing there looking at him with nothing between him and it but the glass. And he said the only thing he could think to do was to, again, jam the car into on and into drive and get the heck out of there. So he got out of there and he just kept driving the rest of the night. He was terrified to stop because it seemed like when he stopped, it suddenly appeared again.
But nothing really threatening except for the noises, right?
No, it didn't attack him.
Mm-hmm.
And they don't seem to attack people often. Among the stories I've collected over the years, very few stories of them attacking people. I also talked to another young man, interestingly enough, his younger brother, who talked about one night he was out in the middle of the night smoking, sitting on his front porch, and this was in the same town, and he hadn't heard his brother's story because this is the night they told me is the first time they each talked to each other about it. And he said he saw what looked like a statue on the roof of the house across the road. Well, he's lived in his house 4 or 5 years, so he knew doggone well there wasn't a statue. So he's sitting there kind of looking at it like, first it was, is that a big bird? And then he's like, nah, that's way too big for a bird. And then it was like, did they put something weird on their roof? Like, and I just noticed it till tonight. And as he says that, it's a pretty decently moonlit night. There's street lights down below, so there's a fair amount of light. It stands up and spreads its wings and takes off. And he said it almost dipped to the ground, like it was heavy. And the wings were like a tarpaulin sound, like if it was whipping in the wind, it was that boom, 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 boom.
Okay.
And he scared him half to death. And he's like, I don't know what I saw. I just know I saw it. And that's in this town.
Again, though, it's nothing actually threatening or menacing, just perhaps the appearance, which we would consider to be, you use the term grotesque, but how many things do we know of that upon first view they look sinister or ugly that turned out to be completely benign?
Yeah, I think that they are just, the sight of them would be enough to, scare somebody half to death.
Mm-hmm. Now that differs from like the tales of the reptilians that you've said, where people have stumbled upon them, where they do appear to be malevolent, or at least wanting to cause.
Yeah, and they get that feeling of, I'm in the presence of something evil. Whereas with gargoyles, that doesn't seem to be the general consensus. And I have to tell you, Pennsylvania's had a good many of these stories. Interesting to me how many of them that have come in over the last 15 years. But I have a dear friend, Dan Gordon, who's had several reports of such creatures. He wrote about one in 2011 about a man who was driving along a rural road in Pennsylvania, out in Butler County. Thought he saw a deer at the side of the road. It was dark out. And as he's easing closer, and you slow down when you think you see a deer because you don't know how many there might really be and all that.
Exactly. Yep. Mm-hmm.
And as he's getting closer to it, the headlights fall on it, and he realizes it's not a deer at all. It's a leather-skinned, 8-foot tall humanoid. It was squatting. It stood and crossed the road, and he said 3 steps. That's a huge stride. And then it just sloped up the hill, and he described it as having a back that was sort of sloped, like it wore a bicycle helmet, like it had a kind of an armor to it of some sort. The arms had claws on the end of them, like hands with claws, and its legs were bent like a bird's. But he said that the strangest part of the creature was that the wings were flat on its body. When he closed his wings, the tips touched his ears, and he could pull them in tight.
Almost like a bat.
Yeah, like a bat. At least 6 other people independently reported the same creature that same month in Butler County.
Interesting. Any around there, any caves or anything that would be a natural habitat for something like that?
Oh yeah, the whole of Pennsylvania is riddled with caves and places of that sort that they could live. So it would be easy enough to to make that argument. But they're seen all around the world. I collected stories from Europe, stories from South America. Japan has stories. There are stories everywhere.
Any stories of people actually communicating, verbally or otherwise, with these creatures?
None that I am aware of. It's usually sightings, but some of them are compelling sightings. There was one here in South Boston. This happened in about 2018. So there was this guy who got up in the middle of the night, about 3 o'clock in the morning, was out on his porch smoking a cigarette. It was dark, and he heard the noise of something flapping. Like I said, he described it as like a big leather tarp or something. That was that slapping sound on the air. He looked up, and a winged creature had landed on the neighbor's roof, and it looked just like a gargoyle. He kind of panicked, and basically he had an oh crap moment. What is that? And he's watching the creature, and the creature turned around, looked at him a little bit, and flew away. He said it's like the size of a human, small human, but it had massive wings, and it reminded him of a gargoyle. He was really freaked out by it. Eventually, he would talk about it a little bit, and the story eventually got out and made its way to the public. But this man sought no publicity out of it personally. He was pretty careful to not get any more publicity than necessary. Nobody wants to be the dude who solves the gargoyle.
I could see that. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Same thing as that. The people see the UFOs, or the people see the Bigfoot, or people who see Mothman or Slender Man or whatever.
Sure, they don't want to say these stories.
Mm-hmm.
And so, he didn't talk about it for a while, except tell a couple friends. Well, of course, it doesn't take long until a friend tells a friend, and the friend's friend tells a friend, and off you go. And it ended up becoming public. So another one that I came across was from Vancouver, British Columbia. And this was a young man who was 18 years old. He was helping to clean out his high school library, and it was getting late in the evening. He thought, hey, I'm being a great help to everybody. And he decided to go outside, catch a breath air, fresh air, because his library books were often dusty and hot. It was hot work, packing up this old library and what have you. And that's when he saw it. He went outside. He was standing there kind of breathing in the cool air, and it flew over him. And it was a very bright moonlit night, and he could see it quite clearly. And it just made the local papers in the area. Through the magic of the internet, you can do searches and find, all kinds of stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people think the Jersey Devil might actually have been a gargoyle. And it's a funny thought until you look at pictures of what they describe the Jersey Devil looking like.
Right.
And look at some of the gargoyles.
Especially from what you're saying, if there are multiple races or species of them.
It appears to be that way. But if you look at the Jersey Devil has the head of a horse, that long neck, kind of hoof feet, and the leather wings, it's not a big stretch to think that. In 2015, there's a photo that took around on the internet. It was called the Galloway photo. And according to this gentleman, he lived in Little Egg Harbor Township in Galloway, New Jersey. He was driving home from work late one evening when he thought he saw a llama running in and out of the trees along the road, like somebody's pet llama had gotten lost or something, and he spooked it. So he's really watching, I would be too. If I'm driving along and some animal's thundering along through the trees and I think I'm seeing it, I'd be like, what the heck is that? And he starts to slow down. And that's whenever the llama, as he called it, sprouted wings, opened its wings, and took flight before disappearing completely. He did have his cell phone on him, and he took a bizarre photograph on his phone. But it's a dark figure shaped like a goat with horns or wings or something. And it's a treetop level. And when you look at the picture, I've looked at the picture, it's muddled. I mean, you definitely see there's something there, but it's muddled. I can't tell you that it's not, pareidolia, which is
Right.
our ability to make something out of nothing. But there is definitely something in the photograph. What it is, I can't tell you. In 2017 in Spain, there was a gargoyle creature that appeared to a guy by the name of Alex Nastrick. I can't say his name, who said he was woke up one night with noises outside. He went to look, and it looked like a dog with wings. And this bizarre creature approached within several feet of his house, perched on the roof of a little outbuilding on his property that he could clearly see. He said it had a short beak, a stretched head. Its body was bulky and pinkish in color, and the wings seemed to be leather and curved. They were about 2.5 to 3 feet or meters tall, which is pretty large.
Mm-hmm.
It had a long, thin tail, and it seemed to be moving as if it was having difficulty flying.
Well, if you think about it, I mean, wings, if something, let's say, like a 6 foot tall man, okay, so let's say a 6 foot tall man's 180 to 200 pounds.
Right.
And I'm not going to get into physics or calculations, but the amount of lift necessary to make something of that mass to fly, that has to be, number one, it has to have enough square footage, to be able to provide enough lift, plus the muscle power necessary to make that happen. Like in a bird, okay, so that's, birds, the bird's wings, I mean, but they flutter very, very fast, and a bird weighs ounces. So now we're talking about something that weighs, close to 200 pounds, if from what you're describing. So that has to be an enormously powerful creature with large wings that would be able to, actually provide that much lift.
I agree. I mean, it's amazing that it can get up from the position it's at. Large birds, once they get flying, they have to climb high and float on. They float on the wind,
Mm-hmm.
on the air currents above them, so that they are able to move. It's the idea of a bird being able to do that is just insanely difficult to imagine. But it does explain some of the sightings where they seem to struggle to get up into the air, and
Mm-hmm.
they almost hit the ground before they can get enough lift to go back up again.
I mean, you've seen pictures of people wearing wingsuits,
Mhm.
but they're not really providing any lift. They have to start up high and then they have to
Right.
glide. So um, so that's possible. But I mean, I've never done that myself. I don't really plan to do that. But I mean, I can only imagine, unless you have an updraft, you're going to be, depending on how you're pitched, you're still going to make a gradual descent. No matter what you do in one of those things.
Yeah, I mean, it seems interesting. But then this thing, whenever they come almost to the ground, they're able to, flapping their wings, are able to get enough lift to start upward again,
Mm-hmm.
and then they disappear into the night. Usually, it's usually seen at night, not always, but usually seen at night. I have to tell you, the Midwest, the Illinois, Wisconsin, Michigan, that region seems to be filled with these stories, and they've gotten a lot more popular in the recent years. Like 20 years ago, you rarely heard such a tale. But in starting in about 2000, the stories started coming in. Sometimes there's a couple here and there from the 1970s, 80s, and 90s, just a couple. And then they start picking up steam. So in Illinois, there was a young woman, it's near Rockford, Illinois, in an area called the Stillman Valley. This young lady and her boyfriend were driving along. It was about 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning when this huge creature, she'd estimated it between 7 and 10 feet tall, with a huge wingspan, flew over them and almost hit their car. It was coming at them, from what I can tell from the article. And it literally flew over the hood, up across the windshield, and across the car completely. She described it as looking like a gargoyle. She said that, the same time we screamed, "Did you see that?" And they weren't willing to turn around and go back and chase it, so they just kept on going. But about a year later, in that same spot, another woman, a woman had reported that she had an encounter with a gargoyle in the same area, same kind of thing. It came out and sort of dove at the car. And about a year and a half after that, a young couple going home from a date seemed to see the same creature. It seems to have been spending a lot of time in that area for some reason.
Well, I mean, if that's where home is,
Yeah.
so let's say there's of course, my mind goes to cave. Anytime I think something bat like, I'm thinking, okay, a cave or some other type of shelter, because, if there was well, I guess if you had, unless you had real hands to build something, you're going to be looking for some type of natural shelter.
I have to wonder, we're going to do a whole spate of Chicago sightings. So Chicago's been inundated since the 1980s with what they were calling bird sightings, then it was Mothman sightings, and now it's gargoyle. Same set of stories, but they're just refining the name to get closer to whatever it was they saw. There was a young man who was a NASA employee, a former NASA employee, who claims that in 1986 he saw a gargoyle. He was, his name was Frank Shaw. He was going home while he was working at NASA, and he was getting ready to leave. It was late in the evening, and he saw something. When he gets home, it's still bothering him. His wife asks him if he was okay. He's like, yeah, I'm fine. His daughter's like, I don't think you're fine, Dad. You're quiet. He just wasn't himself. So finally, after a lot of prodding, he told them that as he was headed toward his car that night, he saw a creature that looked like a gargoyle perched on top of a NASA building. And he stopped, he was looking at it, and he was trying to figure out what it was, because he shouldn't have been there. He walked that same walk 100 times, and it shouldn't have been there. And he's standing there staring at it when he realized that it looked a lot like a gargoyle. Now, he said it looked like it was made of stone until it began to move. And it was staring right at him, watching him. And it lifted its wings and it flapped its wings and started to fly towards him. At that point, Frank got really frightened and ran for his car, got into his car and took off as fast as he could. He would never tell anybody about it his entire life other than his wife and his daughter. It was not too long after he died that his daughter reached out to Nick Redfern, the author, and told him the story because she wanted to know if anybody else had ever seen anything like that. And the truth is, according to reports, there is a file at NASA of sightings of this creature. In fact, Frank would go to work a couple weeks later and make a couple veiled comments to his boss. And his boss, he saw this great big bird outside and stuff like that, just kind of feeling out the situation.
Right.
And his boss said, "Are you talking about that gargoyle?" And he's like, "The what?" He's like, "Yeah." He's like, "Do you think you're the first one to see it? There's a lot of guys that have seen it. I've got reports. We got a file on it." It made him feel better, but he still didn't feel comfortable enough to go public with it. So it would only be after his death that his daughter would. But she made mention of that because her dad was thrilled to find out that other people had seen it and it wasn't just him.
Yeah, you have to think. I mean, you don't want to be known as a crackpot, but then you also don't want to lose your job, especially if you're working for an agency like NASA. I mean,
right.
You probably have to have a pretty good psychological profile to work for an organization like that. I mean, not everybody at NASA is a rocket scientist, I guess.
No, I'm sure there's the techs and there's all kinds of people, computer people, there's secretarial staff, there's all kinds of people. But this gentleman, he was intrigued and concerned enough to go back in and to actually throw some hints until he found somebody in his office. His supervisor was like, "Oh yeah, you're talking about the gargoyle. Yeah, you're not the first guy to see that." And I think that when we hear words like gargoyle or lizard man, we roll our eyes. We do the, "Oh, they're crazy," because we don't want to believe and we've been taught not to believe. But there's something out there, obviously. I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's normal, paranormal. I don't know if it's evil, if it's just another creature. I have no clue. I just know that something's being seen, and I'm curious. I haven't made any hard, fast decisions on what it is, what its intent is. Whatever this creature is, it doesn't seem violent. I mean, the closest we've come so far is a guy saw it flying toward him.
And maybe just wanted to come say hi.
Yeah, I mean, we don't know. Now, on another account, it did say that 2 weeks before that, 2 dogs had been found dead in the very same area where his car was parked, torn apart. So maybe it was eating. I don't know. But, we don't blame hawks and eagles and things like that if they take birds and take animals for food.
No, we humans take animals for food.
We all take animals for food, sure. And I just thought it was a fascinating story considering who he was and the fact that his sighting was so documented, and that there are other stories. I've done a lot of reading on it, and there are other stories from NASA area. In fact, there's a couple buildings that are known for it among the NASA staff. And that brought me to another point when you were talking about caves and things of that nature. What if, like any other animal, they're urbanizing? We have hundreds of abandoned buildings in cities. Yeah. But what if they manage to, live in some of those buildings? Imagine a transient coming out in the middle of the night screaming that he saw a winged monster. They'd be putting him in Bellevue.
Yeah. Yeah, for some reason, somebody like that would tend to have less credence or be given less credence than somebody who, had a fixed address. Yeah.
Sure. They would, I mean, if they were seeing them, they would either not talk about it or talk about it among themselves. Like, these people know that they're not going to be given any credibility. So they're just going to, move on. They're going to be scoffed at. But the thought of, if they're taking shelter, there's a lot of shelter in cities and towns now.
Well, that's true. I mean, even the area where I live, I mean, there's some wooded area, not much, but yet I've got images, I have security cameras outside my house, and I've seen as many as 13 deer at one time coming through my backyard.
Oh my goodness.
Yes.
I've seen them in the middle of my town running down Main Street at 3 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah, the biggest gathering is my wife had an apple sitting for an extended period of time and became less than fit for human consumption. So she tossed it out in the backyard thinking that the rabbits or something else would eat it. Oh no. I found that night a gaggle of deer all circled around this thing, looking at are you going to get it? Are you going to get it? Are you going to get it? Yeah, it was interesting. And they were all in a cluster, but yeah, 13 was the most I've seen. So, but yeah, they're definitely adapting, to where they have to live.
In a city like Chicago has a lot of abandoned buildings. There's entire.
But also something that large, is definitely going to be seen a lot, I think, unless, does most of its movement at night.
Well, they do seem to be moving at night in the wee hours of the morning. Like most of the encounters you see are between 2 and 4 in the morning, which is when there's the least amount of people about. And then they're moving in the darkness. They're apparently not actively seeking people out. So I think there's still a chance that that's a possibility, even if it's not all the time. There's Bigfoot sightings in towns now.
Well, that was my next question. I mean, it said, have we, has there been Bigfoot sightings in towns? But I guess you just clarified that.
Yeah. Now, I know somewhere there was a trailer park out in Western PA where the garbage was getting ripped up every night, and this guy decided to take a shotgun and kill the critter. He expected it to be a raccoon or maybe a bear. And if it was a bear, he was just going to shoot out over its head and spook it. So his garbage is sitting in its garbage can. Whatever it was able to knock the lids off, because the lids would be off the cans and it would be scattered all over his porch every night. And down at the big dumpster where everybody took their garbage at the trailer park, the lid would be flipped up and garbage would be out, all over the ground. So this night he hears the noise and he goes to the door with his gun in hand, figuring he's going to shoot over its head and spook it. Right. And when he turns on the porch light and steps out, he doesn't come face to face with a bear or a raccoon. It's a Bigfoot. He had a heart attack. The Bigfoot ran away. His wife called the police, and that's what he told the paramedics he saw.
Oh, so he literally had a heart attack.
He literally had a
Okay,
heart
okay,
attack.
okay. I'm thinking. I mean that yeah, to turn a phrase, you know.
Yeah, no, he
Oh, no.
literally had a heart
Wow,
attack. And his
wow.
wife called the paramedics, and when they came, they were like, "What's going on?" And he kept saying, "I saw it, I saw it." And he told them, and through a series of events, a police officer who came with them for the call would contact Stan Gordon, and Stan would record this story years and years ago. So if they're coming into trailer parks and people's homes, there's several other stories that I could tell you where they were attracted by things on the porches. I told a story in one of my books about one that seemed to have a romantic interest in a 6-foot tall stuffed gorilla in the basement of a family's home.
Alrighty. Yeah.
No, seriously, it's a true story.
No, I
Yeah.
don't doubt it. It was just like that's surreal.
Well, they had this big stuffed gorilla sitting in a chair, like they had some old abandoned furniture in the back bottom of how people do in their basement, right? So they pulled this old table and these 2 chairs up and stuffed this big gorilla on one of the chairs, and they began having issues with Bigfoot sightings, and this thing was tearing at the siding on their house right above that window. And the only thing anybody's ever come up with is that it was trying to get into whatever that big purple gorilla was. So if they're willing to go that far, I don't see why, there couldn't be abandoned places in towns where they're suddenly taking up habitation, making them more noticeable. Because I'll tell you what, in 3 states, between the 3 states, I've probably found 60 or 70 sightings in specific areas. So they're being seen. O'Hare Airport has a plethora of stories.
Airport, that makes me think, okay, airport's got radar, Is it something large enough to be seen on a radar?
That's a good question. I don't know. But I mean, I've read so many stories by people. There's a great article that was done that chronicled from 1970 till 2017 all the sightings in these 3 states. And there must be at least 8 to 10 from O'Hare Airport that made it all the way. Probably the most famous one is about a group of 3 guys from United Cargo working out of O'Hare who were getting ready to leave. Their TSA service personnel. They're getting ready to leave in the evening. This would not have been late. This would have been like 11 o'clock. That's a pretty early sighting time-wise. They walk out to go home. As they approach their cars, they see something moving across the street on the other side of the fence. It's a chain link fence, so you can see through it. So they're kind of watching. Now, this is a well-lit area because, the airport's well-lit all over. And as they're walking, the one guy points it out, and he's like, "Hey, there's something across the street there." And they're kind of watching it. And it's at that point in time that a white ambulance comes zipping past them headed into the airport, which I would imagine there's all kinds of emergencies that happen in an airport with passengers, heart problems and what have you. So as it's going along, this ambulance is flashing its lights. They catch a really good vision of what's across the street. They described it as 6 to 7 foot tall. It was very dark gray, almost black. It had 2 large glowing red eyes. And he said, I don't know if that was from their flashlights because we pulled our flashlights off and we're looking in its direction. It was there about 10 seconds after the first ambulance arrived. And then his friends said to him, said out loud, "God have mercy," as they're watching it. And this thing had giant bat wings and it lifted them up and flew away. And they're watching as it's flying across the runways and the terminals and disappears into the distance. And at that point, a white pickup truck with TSA emblems on the side of it comes zipping towards them, and their guys get out of it and they're watching. Altogether, there'll be 12 people who see this thing flying. All of them TSA agents. And one of the TSA, the last TSA truck that came in, the security agent got out and he said to them, I need you to go out of this area, get to your cars for safety. And he didn't seem surprised.
But why for safety, unless there had been
That's a good question.
previous incident or something of that nature for them to say that, okay, there's some imminent danger here that you should vacate, or they were just being instructed to, again, not fitting the narrative of the day,
Right.
We don't want you to see this.
Exactly. Well, he said that this gentleman who was the first one to come forward, this happened on July 22nd of that year. It was around 11 o'clock at night. He said that he was within 25 to 50 yards of this thing at all times, so he could definitely see it in all the bright lighting, And they said what they thought was so odd was that it was so close to the fence that it literally seemed to hop over the fence. We're talking a 6-7 foot high fence, and then it took off running and started to fly.
And airports don't just have just straight chain link fence; they have the angled part with the barbed wire on the top too, typically. Yeah.
Yeah, the witnesses all described it very much the same way. And by the way, there's also a lot of UFO sightings in O'Hare.
So, but that makes me wonder, the UFOs, because UFOs have also been seen around Bigfoot sightings as well. So,
Yes,
is there a connection? Are these all part of, some are we being watched? Well, of course we're being watched, but by whom?
Yeah, and I don't know. I don't know if these are things that have been here forever, since they're tens of thousands of years old, or have they just been here watching us that long?
Well, from the previous episode when you mentioned about the person who had the conversation with the reptilian, they'd been here about 5,000 years, if I remember right. You said that. Yeah. So they had to come here from someplace else if they'd been here 5,000 years. So
yeah,
where else from? Where else from but from the planet? But I mean, that's and again, Renaissance art and other things like that where you saw UFOs in it. That's about the same time as, well, I don't think we have cave paintings of gargoyles, but certainly we have Renaissance art of gargoyles.
We definitely do. And we have cave paintings of what look like large, crude bird creatures, which could be anything from thunderbirds to gargoyles. There's a little overlap there. So, how else would you depict them? They would be pretty similar, and if you're just drawing little stick figures.
Well, one of the places my mind went to, I mean, we've talked about time slips before. Maybe time slips go both ways. So think about that. A time slip from 20 million years ago with a pterodactyl flying somehow interacted with our space.
Exactly.
Yeah. Who knows?
So, well, before we leave O'Hare, I wanted to tell you there was an investigation actually done. This actually made the newspapers eventually, in the local news. And the FAA was asked, and United Airlines were asked if there's any truth to the story, and they said no, absolutely not. But taped calls and evidence would eventually appear, which showed that there were communications about the event after it occurred in the airlines, and the FAA said that they wanted to tell people it was a weather phenomena and advised employees not to talk about it.
Oh, because of course that's if we didn't talk about the weather, we couldn't talk about anything, right?
Yeah.
There wouldn't be any small talk.
So the argument was that there were safety implications for anything operating at a low altitude over a major airport, and that they had to keep the story quiet for that reason, which makes no sense whatsoever.
Yeah, I've never heard of a killer dust devil.
Birds fly into planes all the time and do a lot of damage. But this was what they decided to say. They said that it was a circular shaped cloud. There was vapor coming out of it, and then that the being appeared out of the circle shaped cloud. Think about that.
Again, I'm thinking interdimensional creature, or something using interdimensional space to travel. And so let's say you open a portal between another dimension and this one, just like we have fog forming from whenever warm, moist air meets cold air. You have a temperature differential. Now, I'm no meteorologist, but that's pretty much how fog forms.
It's a fascinating how creative they can be. So I wanted to give everybody a listing of some of these sightings in Chicago and in Illinois, how close they are. So there are winged creatures seen in 1957 in Chicago area. In 1969, Floyd Hannock claimed to be abducted as a child by a tall winged humanoid. That's as close as I've ever come to anybody getting hurt. He was abducted and supposedly returned. A retired police officer, David Ramos, in 1971 admitted that a shadowy winged humanoid had appeared to him when he was 12, and he lived on the North Branch of the Chicago River. A 13-year-old claimed to have had an intense experience with a red-eyed winged being outside of Chicago. In 1987, a man stated that a human-like flying creature with glowing red eyes appeared to him. A winged creature showed up in Gosham Dam in Indiana and seemed to be interested in what was going on at the dam. In Chicago, Illinois, in the summer of 2003, a woman and her friend claimed to have seen an owl man outside the window of their home. There are just hundreds of these sightings. It's insane. And they seem to focus on, interestingly enough, much like UFOs, there's a lot about Air Force bases, airports, dams, places like that, as well as people, just regular people seeing them. But there's a thing that kind of runs through, a thread that runs through this whole process. They seem to be inspecting certain areas. A man claiming in 2011 that he saw a winged creature with a bulbous head and what appeared to be tentacles, and it was flying over his Chicago neighborhood. A woman reported seeing humanoid flying with yellowish eyes near the Prairie Creek Reservoir. And on and on and on. And then there's just I'd say a 7 to 11, somewhere in that range, sightings at O'Hare over the years that all appear to have been, like, they run from the 50s all the way up till now. So that's a long time span. And they're not all described identical. There's 5 to 7 feet seems to be the general height of them. They all seem to be very dark in nature, dark color, dark gray or black. But the heads are described as everything from humanoid to bug-like. The vast majority of them seem to have arms that are attached to wings, but some of them talk about tentacles. I don't know if it's a different type of species or what it is, and then the eyes glow differently. Some are red, some are gold or yellow. There's even been a couple that are reported as greenish.
I mean, even an animal like a cat. I mean, because their eyes reflect, gather and reflect light. I mean, so there can be very little ambient light, and you're still going to see a cat's eyes glow.
Right.
But, are they actually glowing on their own accord, or are they, just reflecting light? So that's what makes me wonder, and just depending on whatever kind of reflective tissue that the light is hitting, so. Right. Even outdoors at nighttime, there's always some kind of reflected light coming from somewhere, especially if you're in any kind of developed area.
Right. And we're talking about major cities, airports, things like that. So there's definitely going to be that. And even some people, I didn't know this until a few years ago, but there are some people that have eye shine.
Oh, I've
Um,
edited quite a number of photos to get rid of red eye on the pictures. You know, I mean, that's just, yeah, that's whenever the flash or whatever directly um, reflects off a person's retinas. You know,
right. I
and
have a
that's
friend
common.
who told me he dated a girl that he said it creeped him out. Her eyes would glow, and it was at night if you like put a flashlight on them or something.
Hmm.
And he said she had some, I forget what the medical term for it was, but there was apparently people who have that ability to have eye shine.
They probably see better in the dark than, or in darker environments too, if they're able to reflect the light like that. Yeah.
Yeah, I would think so. I would. So anyhow, that's our first little deep dive into the gargoyle world. What do you think?
Yeah, thoroughly enjoyable. You know, just all kinds of thoughts going through my head, and I'm thinking like, it's going to sound bizarre, but having experienced ghosts and hi Loki and
Yeah.
having ghosts and yeah, I'm kind of envious of the people who do have these encounters. You
Yeah,
know,
I mean,
with Bigfoot, gargoyle, UFOs, things like that. Now, not like I'm putting my hand up to volunteer,
oh,
but
okay.
if I'd like to think that I wouldn't have either fight or flight, that I would be exhibit curiosity, scientific curiosity. I'd like to think that I do that, but I mean, who's to say what's going to happen? Whenever you're faced with a situation like that,
Yeah, I think that's that moment. Like some of the people, when I was reading the articles and stuff, said about they had no fear whatsoever. They didn't feel threatened. Others were terrified. I think it's more about us than maybe them.
hmm
Because I see that a lot in the paranormal world. I had a lady one time, this is the best example I can come up with, who called me and said, I need help. This ghost in my house is going to attack my son, and she's going to hurt him. I know she is. And so I calm her down, and I'm talking to her. And I said, well, how long have you lived in the house? And she's like, 11 years. And I'm like, how old's your son? And he's like 13. And I'm like, and just now the ghost is beginning to act negatively towards your child. How's he acting negatively? And she's like, well, he comes home from school and the ghost slams open the door and blah, blah, blah. And she's like, and it's watching for him. It's waiting for him. And I'm like, maybe it's just excited he's home. In 11 years, nothing happened. So, but her head took her to Amityville Horror when it was probably nothing like it.
they're just misinterpreting based on influences that may be Hollywood or other,
Yeah.
that you just think that every spirit's malevolent, when in fact that's quite the opposite.
Yeah, the vast majority of them are not. But it took me a little while to calm her down enough, like a couple weeks, to get her to understand that there's no overt threat in the fact that the ghost opens the door at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. That doesn't mean he's trying to suck your son inside and like steal his soul. It's just he's happy the kid's home. He's been watching him for 11 years.
Or well, I mean, how often has poltergeist activity been attributed to or found a link, at least anyway, through teenagers going through puberty?
Right.
Yeah. Not saying that's the case, but I mean that's certainly been looked at.
It's one of the theories. Not the only theory, but certainly, but it's the one that the scientific community holds as the most probable, is that it's the energy produced by the emotional turmoil of young people, usually girls, almost exclusively girls, not always, but almost exclusively. However, there are some cases of adult women who have had these issues as well. And what is it really? I don't know. Is it an angry spirit? Is it biological energy? I don't know. But it's fascinating. It's a subject we'll probably touch on at some point. There's some pretty interesting stories.
Yeah, that would be a good episode, but yeah, not gargoyles, but I mean that's not today's topic, but still, that'd be certainly a topic that I'd like to explore. Yeah.
I think we will. definitely do that sometime in the next few weeks.
All right.
So,
well, we'd like to thank everybody for viewing, watching, and joining us today. If you are subscribed to our YouTube channel, we sincerely thank you for that. Tell your friends, tell your family, anybody who you think may benefit from this program. Go ahead and click that subscribe button, click the like button. You'll be notified whenever we irregularly release new content. We're doing that as best as we can. We have our Facebook page, which has actually increased in membership recently, and we thank everyone for that. That's the Paranormalist Podcast on Facebook. And you can also find us, again, on YouTube. The Paranormalist Podcast is the name of our channel. And again, we always have the email address open, paranormalist@theparanormalistpodcast.com. We'd love to hear your stories, your ideas, your encounters, whatever you may have for us. We'd be really happy to hear from you.
yes, we will. And we'll take it all into account. And maybe you'll see some of your ideas on upcoming episodes.
That's happened before.
It has. And there's a couple more coming up.
Good. So, all right, Patty, thank you very much for this wonderful episode today. And so I wish you a good rest of your day. I know you've got some things to do. I've got some things to do. So.
Yep. We had a beautiful day out today, so we got to make some hay while the sun shines.
There were supposed to be thunderstorms an hour ago here. So no thunderstorms. So I'm going to take that as a good omen.
All right. You have a wonderful evening, Stu.
Hey, thank you, Patty.
Bye.
Good night.